Faith in God has always been about more than a distant acknowledgement of His existence. Genuine faith is a transformative relationship, one that shapes our values, our priorities, and the lens through which we see ourselves and the world. True faith calls us to trust the unseen, to rely on divine wisdom rather than merely human understanding. It is not a shallow optimism that pretends everything is perfect when it is not. Rather, it is an anchor that holds us secure when the seas of life rage around us. Faith does not always spare us from difficulties, but it does sustain us through them. When we think about never giving up on God, we inevitably confront the fact that faith will be tested. Our resolve to trust in God's goodness and presence is not formed on calm waters alone. Instead, it is shaped in times of confusion, pain, and disappointment. We face sickness, financial hardship, broken relationships, and personal failures that make us wonder if our prayers are falling on deaf ears. In those seasons, many of us question whether the lessons we learned about God's love and mercy still apply. We may feel discouraged when the answers we desperately long for remain elusive or delayed. Yet the story of Scripture and the testimonies of countless believers across history reveal that God does some of His greatest work in the midst of human struggles. The very challenges that tempt us to abandon hope often become the catalyst for deeper spiritual growth. When we come to the end of our own strength and realize how limited our control truly is, our hearts become more receptive to God's sustaining power. We discover that He is the same God who parted seas for the Israelites, who gave Abraham a child against all odds, who led David from shepherd boy to king, who upheld the prophets when they were threatened and persecuted, and who through Christ brought salvation out of what appeared to be absolute defeat. These stories remind us that God has never been confined by human weakness or blocked by impossibility. On the contrary, He specializes in transforming impossible situations into testimonies of His grace. If we do not give up, if we hold on to that small spark of faith and allow it to guide us, we find that God can turn even the darkest season into a time of renewal. We see that He uses our hardships to refine our hearts, to deepen our empathy, and to sharpen our sense of dependence on Him. That sense of dependence is not a weakness, as the world might suggest, but a gateway to discovering the fullness of divine strength. There are times when we might be tempted to surrender to despair, because the voices around us say that trusting in God is naive. Skeptics will point to every unanswered question or moment of pain as proof that God either does not exist or does not care. Yet authentic faith is not about having every question answered before believing. It is about choosing to hold on to the certainty of God's character, revealed throughout history and experienced by countless believers who have been transformed by His presence. Faith, in this sense, becomes a deliberate commitment to stay in communion with God, even when the details of life do not make immediate sense. When the winds of adversity blow and the storms rage, we might lose our footing if our faith is shallow or built purely on ritual. The external shell of religion cannot sustain us through a genuine crisis. We need something deeper, something that flows from personal encounter with the divine. To never give up on God means more than reciting a creed or attending services. It means cultivating a real relationship that manifests in daily communication, heartfelt prayer, and study of sacred texts that reveal God's nature and promise. It means daring to believe that God's plan, though sometimes mysterious to our finite minds, is being worked out for our good and for the greater tapestry of His kingdom. Even so, trusting God does not imply that our problems vanish instantly. Sometimes the greatest act of trust is waiting patiently, maintaining gratitude, and staying faithful to what we know is right, even when the path ahead is not clear. There's a process of maturation that happens in the waiting room of faith. In the waiting, our perseverance is tested and our devotion is purified. We begin to see that God desires not just to meet our immediate wants, but to transform our characters and align our hearts with His. In that alignment, we find a joy that is not dependent on external circumstances, because it is rooted in the knowledge that we are beloved by our Creator. There are countless examples of people who refuse to give up on God despite overwhelming odds. Some of them endured physical challenges that seemed insurmountable. Life can sometimes feel like a series of storms that come without warning and challenge us in ways we never anticipated. In those moments when the waves crash the hardest, when it feels like there is no light at the end of the tunnel, it is easy to wonder if there is anything solid to hold on to. Doubt creeps in, telling us that maybe God has forgotten us or that we have wandered too far away from His favor. We question whether He still listens to our prayers, whether He is still guiding our steps, or if we were ever worthy of His guidance in the first place. Yet it is often in the most desperate hours that we discover the surprising depth of God's faithfulness. Even when we are broken, afraid, or consumed by despair, God remains steady and unchanging. It is precisely when every other door slams shut in front of us that we realize how much we need the door that God alone can open. In these trials, we uncover spiritual truths hidden beneath our weaknesses and see evidence that we are loved far more than we can imagine. We may not always understand why certain tests come our way, but those tests can become the training ground where our trust in God is stretched and refined. If we look closely enough, we can see God's fingerprints scattered across the pages of our story, woven into the chaotic tapestry of our experiences, reminding us that He has been walking with us all along. This introduction is not meant merely to capture attention. Rather, it is an invitation to open our hearts, to face our doubts honestly, and to draw near to the One who does not abandon us when life gets hard. It is a rallying cry to hold on with steadfast determination, even when logic says to let go. The reward of persevering faith transcends immediate circumstances and echoes into eternity, offering peace that surpasses all understanding. Cling to this spark of hope, because it has the power to illuminate even the darkest valleys. Let these words draw you in and inspire you to keep listening, to keep watching, to keep believing that the goodness of God is real and accessible to every seeking heart. No matter how far you feel you have drifted, no matter how many mistakes weigh on your conscience, there's a divine love that pursues you relentlessly. If you find yourself at a crossroads, if you are battling discouragement, disappointment, or a sense of spiritual fatigue, remember that God's help is closer than your next breath. There is a message of comfort, strength, and resilience waiting for you. Stay, listen, and let the living words of hope rekindle a flame in your spirit that cannot be easily extinguished. What follows is an exploration of that journey, from the painful questions to the triumphant discoveries that bloom when we do not give up on God. Others faced persecution for their beliefs, yet clung to their faith. Many have experienced personal tragedies that left them questioning their purpose in life. But in the midst of that pain, they found God's comforting presence in a way they never had before. Stories like these testify that our trials do not have to be the end of our journey with God. Instead, they can mark a new beginning, a deeper awareness of who He is and who we are in His eyes. When we refuse to give up on God, we open the door to a form of resilience that goes beyond what is humanly possible. We tap into a source of power that can help us overcome bitterness, release the weight of anger or resentment, and find the courage to face each day with renewed purpose. This resilience is not merely about toughing it out or ignoring pain. It involves surrendering our burdens to the one who is able to carry them. It involves admitting that we cannot do it alone, and that we do not have to. That realization can be liberating. We often forget that our relationship with God is not just about us clinging desperately to Him. It is also about Him holding firmly to us, strengthening us with a grace that can conquer despair. In many faith traditions, the image of a refiner's fire is used to illustrate how believers are shaped and purified through trials. Metals are placed in intense heat so that impurities rise to the surface and can be removed. In a similar way, adversity forces us to confront the parts of ourselves that might otherwise remain hidden. We see our fears, our doubts, our insecurities, and even our selfish inclinations. This confrontation can feel unsettling, but God can use it to refine us, teaching us humility, compassion, and courage. Although the process can be painful, the end result is a more genuine faith, free from the illusions and pretenses we often carry. The question arises, how do we keep going when it seems like every reason to believe has crumbled? The answer lies in shifting our gaze from the size of our problems to the greatness of our God. It is a conscious decision to focus on His promises, His past faithfulness, and the testimonies of those who have found Him trustworthy throughout generations. Sometimes, we need to remember the simpler moments when God answered a prayer or brought an unexpected blessing. Reflecting on how far He has brought us can remind us that His work is not finished. When we remember that He is the God of yesterday, today, and forever, we see that our current trial is not the final chapter. The story of humanity is filled with those who took leaps of faith long before results were obvious. The patriarchs left familiar lands because they believed in a higher calling. The prophets spoke truth to power, risking their very lives because they trusted in God's direction. Jesus Himself modeled unwavering trust, continuing on His mission even when misunderstood, rejected, and eventually crucified. The resurrection story reminds us that what looks like defeat can actually be the doorway to victory. If we give up too soon, we might miss the resurrecting power that can transform our lives. Perhaps one of the most comforting assurances is that God is not afraid of our questions or our struggles. He invites us to bring our pain, our confusion, and our frustration to Him in prayer. We see biblical figures, such as Job or David, pouring out their hearts openly, confessing their anger and sorrow. Yet despite their honest expressions, they kept the conversation alive with God. That is key. When we stop talking to God, we risk becoming isolated in our pain. But as long as we keep the channel of communication open, we give Him the opportunity to speak to our hearts. Sometimes He responds with reassurance and comfort, sometimes with conviction and guidance, and sometimes with quiet presence that words cannot capture. Over and over, he reassures us that he will never leave or forsake us, even if for a season we walk through the shadows of uncertainty. Another aspect to consider is the community of faith. While our personal relationship with God is vital, we are also called to walk with others who share our convictions. When we try to stand alone, the burden can become overwhelming. We might find ourselves more susceptible to discouragement or deception. Yet when we open ourselves to a supportive community, we gain new perspectives, encouragement, and tangible help in times of need. It is often through fellow believers that God ministers to us, using their words, their comfort, and their acts of service. There is a powerful dynamic that unfolds when people of faith come together, each carrying their testimonies and experiences of God's goodness. Such a gathering can remind us that the story is bigger than our individual struggles, that we are part of a vast tapestry of believers who are upheld by divine grace through every trial. There will be seasons when we might feel too weak to continue on our own, but the arms of a loving community can lift us up, reminding us of truths we temporarily lose sight of in our anguish. Even within that community, our journeys will differ. Some find their faith tested in health challenges, others in personal relationships, others in professional setbacks. The outward circumstances vary, but the inner battle is often the same. We must choose to believe that God is still good, that he still sees us, and that he has not lost control. This inner stance of faith is what allows us to keep pressing forward, even if our steps feel small or halting. Sometimes faith is not a grand display of confidence, but rather a quiet, persistent whisper that says, "I will trust you anyway." That whisper can be enough to move mountains in our hearts. When we find ourselves in the heat of the trial, it is tempting to believe the pain is unending. Yet Scripture and experience often show that trials are temporary, even if they feel prolonged from our perspective. Holding on to God in the middle of those trials positions us to discover deeper revelations of his character. We learn that his grace really is sufficient, that he can sustain us in ways we never thought possible, that joy can coexist with sorrow, that hope can flourish in the midst of uncertainty. These paradoxes of faith expand our understanding of life and draw us closer to the heart of God. A fundamental aspect of perseverance is letting go of the illusion that everything must make immediate sense. Faith involves acknowledging that God's perspective is infinitely broader than ours. He sees connections and outcomes that we cannot begin to fathom. In humility, we accept that some answers may only come in time, or possibly remain hidden until we meet God face to face. But within that humility, there is a profound peace. We realize that we do not have to bear the weight of the universe on our shoulders. We can place our questions, our aches, and our unfulfilled longings at the feet of the Almighty, trusting in his love and sovereignty. At times, our faith is strengthened by looking back at personal history and recognizing the quiet ways God has supported us. Perhaps he placed certain people in our path at just the right moment, provided resources when we were at our lowest, or shifted circumstances behind the scenes to guide us in an unexpected direction. We might not have seen those interventions clearly at the time, but in retrospect, we realize they were divine fingerprints. These moments, though seemingly small, can be our stepping stones to greater faith. They serve as reminders that God has always been at work, weaving together the strands of our lives into a tapestry that reflects His care. Never giving up on God also involves letting go of bitterness. Sometimes we blame God for the things that hurt us the most. We wonder why He allowed a particular tragedy, or why He withheld something we believed we desperately needed. This blame can become a cancer in the soul, eating away at our capacity to hope. Forgiveness is not only about forgiving those who have wronged us. It can also involve forgiving God in the sense of releasing our resentments against Him. Of course, God does no evil to us, but our human perspective might interpret certain hardships as betrayals. When we release that bitterness and acknowledge that we do not see the whole picture, our hearts soften, opening the door to reconciliation with the God who has been loving us every step of the way. In that openness, we can begin to experience healing, a renewed sense of connection, and a deeper understanding of how God can bring beauty out of ashes. It is also worth noting that faith does not ask us to stop grieving or feeling pain. When a loss occurs, when a dream dies, when someone we love is taken from us, it is natural to mourn. We find examples in Scripture of weeping, lamenting, and crying out to God in heartbreak. Our tears are not signs of weak faith. They can be catalysts for deeper intimacy with God, as they reflect an authentic emotional life that we bring before Him. What faith does is keep us from falling into permanent despair. It whispers that even in the sorrow, God is near, collecting our tears, ministering to our wounded hearts, and promising that one day He will wipe away every tear forever. In the life of every believer, there will be a moment of choice: to abandon hope or to cling to God with renewed determination. That choice may arise repeatedly over the course of our lives, especially in prolonged seasons of difficulty. Each time, our decision to stay committed opens the door to spiritual depth we might never have discovered if we had walked away. We realize that every trial can be a stepping stone to a closer walk with God, where our faith becomes something resilient, unwavering, and grounded in personal experience rather than hearsay. That kind of faith is a precious treasure, more valuable than any earthly possession, because it equips us to face life's storms with the peace that circumstances cannot destroy. Inevitably, we will make mistakes along our journey. We might find ourselves questioning God's goodness or even turning our backs temporarily when the burden feels too heavy. Yet we should never assume that a moment of weakness disqualifies us from God's grace. When we humble ourselves and return to Him, we discover that His arms are always open, ready to welcome us back and restore what was lost. This truth is beautifully portrayed in the parable of the prodigal son, where the father runs to meet the returning child, full of compassion and joy. That unchanging love beckons us to never give up, to never believe the lie that we have fallen too far or sinned too greatly to be welcomed back into God's family. At times we need to remember that in our own strength, perseverance is nearly impossible. We grow weary, our vision dims, and we are tempted to quit. But if we rely on God's strength, if we draw near to Him in prayer and fill our minds with His promises, we find the spiritual energy to keep going. It is a daily, sometimes hourly decision to connect with the source of our hope. This ongoing connection transforms our outlook, reshaping our attitudes and renewing our resolve. The longer we walk with God, the more we learn to trust Him, and the more precious this bond becomes. That is how we come to echo the testimonies of those who have faced adversity head-on, and emerged with a song of praise. We realized that not even the darkest nights can extinguish the flame of divine love within us, once we have tasted and seen that the Lord is good. In the end, never giving up on God is about embracing a vision of life that transcends our immediate struggles. It is a vision that recognizes God's eternal plan and our place within it. We learn that our trials are momentary in light of the glory that is to come. Even if our circumstances never fully change in the way we desire, we can experience transformation in our hearts. We can find a serenity that persists despite the outward storms, a reassurance that allows us to rest, knowing God is holding us firmly. This is the essence of hope that does not disappoint. It keeps our hearts open to the possibility of miracles, restoration, and a joy that the world cannot take away. That hope fuels us to keep praying, to keep believing, to keep loving, even when the results are not yet visible. It shapes our character into one that reflects the grace and patience of God to those around us. If you have ever considered giving up on God because the pain felt too intense or the waiting seemed too long, remember that you are in good company among countless believers who have struggled with similar thoughts. The difference is found in the choice they made to persevere in faith, to keep pressing in and pressing on. Their stories remind us that God is faithful, that He finishes what He starts, and that our perseverance can become a living testimony to others. We never know how our steadfast trust in God during hardships might inspire someone else to hold on to hope in their darkest hour. Often, the trials we endure become the messages of encouragement we offer later to those who walk a similar path. In this way, our personal struggles can be transformed into sources of empathy and strength, allowing us to reflect God's compassion and faithfulness to a hurting world. Thus, the call to never give up on God extends beyond our personal survival. It becomes part of a greater purpose in ministering to others who need a glimpse of divine love. Never giving up on God is not a slogan reserved for the times when life is easy. It is a commitment forged in the fires of adversity, shaped by real struggles and refined by divine grace. Through the doubts, tears, and frustrations, there remains a consistent truth. God is with us and for us. When all other supports crumble, He stands firm. When fear tries to consume our thoughts, He offers a spirit of peace. When disappointment weighs heavily, He reminds us that He is the Redeemer of broken dreams. To never give up on God is to declare that our relationship with the Creator is more valuable than the shifting circumstances around us. It is to place unwavering trust in one who knows our weaknesses, yet calls us beloved. It is to walk with the assurance that no valley is too dark for His light to penetrate, no heartbreak too deep for His comfort, and no failure too great for His forgiveness. In the grand story of our lives, perseverance in faith is a defining chapter. In that chapter, we discover the depth of our spiritual identity, the strength we did not know we had, and the beauty of a grace that never runs out. So if you find yourself feeling weary and discouraged, remember that this might be the very place where God's power becomes most evident. His invitation remains open, His kindness never fails, and His promises are as real today as they were in ages past. Let hope flourish again in your heart. Embrace the reminder that you do not walk alone. Choose to keep believing, keep praying, and keep expecting that the God who carried you this far is not about to abandon you. Instead, He is ready to show you new depths of His faithfulness, new horizons of His love, and new reasons to stand in awe of His sovereign grace. In that awe, you will find the strength to press on, to breathe again, to smile again, and to praise again, testifying in the deepest places of your soul that God is worthy of your trust. May this conviction light your path and spark in you the determination to never give up, to never lose faith, and to always remember that God is indeed near to those who seek Him with all their hearts.